Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. Previously you saw Lady Lily was secretly eavesdropping on her husband and Duke Thermion as they discussed Dane and Layla. Amused, she couldn't help but think that these two fathers were both hopelessly protective and completely devoted to their children. Time quickly passed, and after Dane had helped Layla feel the mana within her body, they both promptly left the ruins area. As they walked, Layla didn't forget to thank Dane. "Thank you, Dane," she said, "you're truly a genius." She had heard many people call her a genius, but compared to him, she wasn't that talented. Layla sighed, witnessing what true genius looked like. Meanwhile, hearing her words, Dane turned to encourage her, saying this was just the beginning, and she would definitely get even stronger. As he said this, Dane looked around as if searching for someone, whom those two have quietly left. He muttered, seemingly realizing that they were being watched by their two fathers. Layla, unaware of this, asked after hearing Dane's comment if he was going to the academy too, explaining that it was where all the geniuses of the empire gathered, but Dane didn't seem to notice this, casually shrugging and saying he wasn't sure yet, asking if he really had to go as he could train on his own and get stronger. Layla, unable to hold herself back, turned to explain to Dane that he was a fool, that studying wasn't everything, it was where he formed noble connections and he needed to go if he wanted to build relationships from a young age. She shouted. Seeing Layla present her case like an old man, Dane could only awkwardly scratch his cheek, thinking that for a 7-year-old, she really understood how the world worked. Though he understood that Layla was just looking out for him, he knew, but right now he wasn't interested in going to the academy. There were still piles of books he hadn't read in the library, and he still had so much to learn from his parents, he explained. Layla, not ready to give up, pressed on, asking if he didn't want to play with other kids, adding that she had heard his older sisters went to the academy too. She was persistent, and Dane, thinking to himself, nodded, saying he would think about it later. If he wanted to go, she quickly reminded him he had better tell her if he decided to go. "Okay, I will," Dane answered. On the other hand, trying to entice the protagonist, Layla started making promises, saying that when he came to the capital, he should visit her house and watch her practice too. Promise? Of course, he would send her a letter if he went to the capital. By the way, Dane, she asked, when was he going to tell her his request? He would tell her when he went to the capital. What? Layla exclaimed, completely astonished. Time quickly passed, and the series of birthday celebrations for Dane finally ended. At this moment, Duke Bout's carriage was leaving the Sogres family estate. They said their goodbyes as they departed. Watching the carriage leave, Dane noticed a small box with a beautiful design in their hand. Remembering the gift from before, he realized this was another present Duke Bout had given him before leaving. "What's this?" Dane asked. "It's a birthday gift for you, I hope you like it." Bout smiled. Just by looking at the design, Dane immediately realized that this was something extremely valuable. Turning to Bout, the uncle explained further that the symbol of their Thermion family was revenge, a sword, and a blacksmith. The history of the Thermion family began with their ancestor, a blacksmith, and thanks to him, their family now owned the best forge in the empire. No, in fact, it was the best forge in the entire continent. All the weapons made by the Thermion family had led the empire. Everything was forged at that forge, Bout said proudly. Without needing further introduction, Dane, with his knowledge from his past life, already understood this very clearly. Yeah, he knew they had all kinds of ores and all kinds of weapons and mystical artifacts forged on the continent. This symbol was used to identify those with honor and skill, Dane thought to himself. And just as he predicted, Thermion continued to explain the purpose of the symbol, saying that if he went to the forge and showed them this symbol, they would make a weapon for him based on his preferences. Behind them, Arkin and Lily couldn't help but express their astonishment upon hearing this. "Oh my, what a valuable gift," Arkin exclaimed, his face gradually breaking into a sweat as he realized the true worth of the gift. However, to Bout, it seemed like it wasn't that precious. Before leaving, he patted Dane on the head and advised him to grow up well and help his father. "Thank you for the gift, Duke," Dane hurriedly said. Up ahead, Layla smiled and waved goodbye to him. Back in the present, seeing her son deep in thought, Lady Lily sat down beside him and gently patted his shoulder, comforting him. "Are you sad to part with her?" Dane, hearing his mother's words, his voice tinged with sadness, shared that yes, he was really sad. She was his first friend. When they got to the capital, he would meet her again, just become more handsome and shock her, Lady Lily said enthusiastically. Turning back to his thoughts, he began to gather himself but knew he couldn't stay here forever. He silently told himself he would meet her again when he visited the capital and he hoped Layla would stay healthy. Meanwhile, back in Duke Bout's carriage, he suddenly had a thought. Strange, he mused, every time he looked at Dane, he was reminded of that young warrior named Eric with the talent of a level 3 warrior at such a young age. If he were still alive, he'd probably be a level 6 knight in the Draenic Empire by now. Time quickly passed, and a few days later, back at the Sogres family estate, Dane finally had the chance to examine the 2 gifts Arabella and Claire had given him. Looking at the summoning egg in front of him, Dane mumbled that he would feed it mana every morning and night, but it was still too early for it to hatch. A familiar egg, he thought, although he wasn't a summoner, if he fed it mana to mark it as his own before it hatched, he could control the summoned creature forever, something that was usually only temporary. Thinking to himself, Dane began stroking his chin in contemplation. The quality of his mana clearly needed to be suitable, but there might still be many complex conditions that hadn't been met yet. He had heard that some eggs never hatched because the conditions for hatching were never fulfilled, and he hoped this egg wasn't one of those. With that thought, the young lord gently reached out with both hands, taking the egg and channeling his energy into it. He tried varying the intensity of his mana, however, it didn't seem to have much effect. No matter how he changed the flow and strength of the mana, there was still no response, he thought. Realizing he had been a bit too hasty, he quickly calmed himself, stored the egg away, and exhaled a deep breath. Wanting to succeed on his first try was too greedy, he scolded himself. At that moment, Herman's voice rang out from outside the door, asking if young master was finished. "Oh, it's you, Herman," Dane replied hurriedly, saying he would be right there and heading toward the door. But just then, the egg behind him emitted a faint light and seemed to shift slightly. This made Dane halt his steps, spinning around to check. "Did I just hear something?" he murmured, staring intently at the egg. At the same time, the butler Herman, hearing the noise, quickly rushed inside, asking young master what that sound he had just heard was. "Wait a moment, let me check the egg first," Dane replied. As Dane stared at the egg, his eyes widened in anticipation, but soon his expression fell into disappointment. There was nothing unusual happening. Maybe he was imagining things, he thought, chuckling at his own false hope. Haha, he got his hopes up for nothing. Seeing Dane's disappointed look, Herman quickly deduced what had happened and asked if the egg had reacted at all. "No," Dane replied, he must have just imagined it, telling Herman to let's go and waving his hand dismissively. Time quickly passed and the scene shifted to the training grounds. Today, instead of practicing his spear techniques, Dane was practicing with a sword. After finishing his training, Herman, who had been watching from the side, applauded him, saying "Great job, young master," and asking when he had started practicing swordsmanship. Dane calmly explained that he had just wanted to swing it around for a bit. Indeed, Herman continued to praise him. He was truly talented, even with a sword. Dane, gazing at his reflection in the blade of the sword, felt a surge of satisfaction. It's really fun to learn a new weapon, he thought. He hadn't held a sword in ages because his father always watched so closely. Luckily, he hadn't lost his skills. Meanwhile, Herman took out a tray of biscuits and asked him to please have a snack before they continued. "Sure, thanks, Herman," Dane replied happily, accepting the treat. "Training here is nice." Elsewhere, Dane's father, Arkin, was deep in thought. Another year of this, he mused. It's exhausting, but they had gained a lot from the last banquet. He could confirm that many nobles were turning their attention to the south. Most of them wanted to build good relationships with them since the war ended. The south, with its favorable climate, held much that the nobility coveted. Their interest was obvious, but it still wasn't as intense as the attention Dane had been getting. Arkin reflected on the unexpected conflict with the eldest son of Count Tyren. But the boy had handled it so calmly, explaining the situation clearly in front of the adults. He had even confidently showcased his talents. He's so mature, Arkin thought. Sometimes he wished he'd act his age, be a little more childish, but he guessed that was just him. Glancing at the clock beside him, Arkin mused that it was almost time. Thinking it and acting upon it, not long after, Arkin brought the spear with him as he headed to the training grounds to find Dane. And there he discovered that Dane was practicing with a sword in hand. Arkin wondered inwardly why Dane was using a sword instead of a spear, but it did not take him long to draw his own conclusion. Of course, it must be that old duke who told the boy something. Otherwise, why would he be proudly practicing swordsmanship here after spending so much time mastering the spear? Observing further, Arkin noted with interest that it seemed the boy already had quite a bit of skill with the sword. The strength and precision he displayed, even some people who spent their entire lives practicing swordsmanship could not replicate that. When did he even learn to handle a blade like that? One thing, however, was certain. His son also had a natural talent for swordsmanship, Arkin thought deeply. And after watching for a while longer, he finally spoke to break the silence. "Dane," he said, he had been watching him for a while now. "When did he learn swordsmanship?" Hearing his father's voice, Dane immediately stopped his movements, a slight trace of worry crossing his face. He's been found out, he thought. Maybe it's better to tell father the truth. After a moment of deliberation, he responded that he hadn't really learned it. Huh? Really? So it's pure talent then? Arkin's eyes narrowed in astonishment. Spear mastery, magic, assassination, summoning, and now swordsmanship too? If it were anyone else, He would never believe that a child could be gifted in all of these fields at once. Pausing as if making a decision, Arkin asked seriously, "Dane, are you curious about this world?" Dane's father, Arkin, noticed his son's curious gaze and asked what was on his mind. Dane admitted that his curiosity had been piqued by the world beyond their walls. Arkin explained that he believed the territory they inhabited was too small for someone with Dane's abilities and that staying there might limit his potential. His father spoke with such sincerity that Dane fell silent, realizing Arkin understood it wouldn't be right to keep him confined forever. After a moment of reflection, Dane confessed he wasn't entirely sure about leaving, but he was certainly curious. A gentle smile spread across Arkin's face, and he declared that they must then prepare Dane to step into the outside world. Dane, his eyes lighting up with excitement, asked if he was serious. Arkin nodded, admitting he would miss having Dane close, but a father had to honor his son's wishes. He then raised the spear he had brought and struck its base firmly against the ground, announcing he had something special for Dane. As Dane looked closer, Arkin asked if he recognized it. Dane identified it as Dragon Tail, the spear that had reacted to him on his very first birthday. Holding the spear in his hands, a vague but growing memory surfaced in Dane's mind, and he confirmed that he remembered it reacting to him back then. Arkin told him to take it, handing the spear to his son. The moment Dane's fingers closed around Dragon Tail, an overwhelming surge of energy exploded through his body. Dane marveled silently at the incredible and immense power coursing through him, filling every part of him. On the other side, Arkin stroked his chin thoughtfully, a smile playing on his lips. He observed that the reaction was even stronger now than when Dane was a baby, making it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Arkin then corrected himself, stating he needed to know and he would ensure Dane's talent with the spear shone brighter than anyone else on the continent. A burning sense of determination welled up within Arkin as he stepped forward and placed a firm, reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. He announced his decision that before Dane left he would at least help him master the spear, telling him to get ready because one day Dragon Tail would be his, but until then he needed to grow strong enough to wield it with pride. Dane replied without hesitation, promising to work hard not just for Dragon Tail but to live up to all of his father's teachings. His words carried such conviction that they brought a proud laugh from Arkin, who said that was exactly what he expected from his son before asking if they should begin. Time passed quickly, and after a grueling training session with his father, Dane finally returned to his room, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling, his thoughts drifting far beyond the confines of the room to the outside world he had always been curious about. His mind wandered deeper into memories of his past life as Argrick, a soldier whose entire existence had been consumed by war. In those days his world had been limited to marching across blood-soaked fields, maintaining weapons, eating tasteless rations, and preparing for the next battle. The only escape had been victory or death. There had never been any other way out. He couldn't even imagine what life outside the battlefield would be like, but now as Dane the circumstances were entirely different. He didn't know what role his talents would play, how the world would receive him, or what kind of impact he could make. Yet for the first time he had the freedom to go anywhere and do anything. For a moment he reflected that he had wanted to stay there, basking in the warmth of that place, but his father's words had changed his mind. A spark of determination ignited within him, and before he realized it, he spoke aloud, declaring it was time to step out into the world. Just as Dane finished his declaration, Lady Lily, who had quietly entered the room, overheard him and gently asked if he had made his decision. Surprised, he asked his mother when she had come in. She smiled softly, saying it seemed her deeply thinking son was so lost in thought that he hadn't even heard her knocking. Dane admitted he understood, rubbing the back of his head with a sheepish grin. Lady Lily, not at all upset by his distraction, looked at him with warm eyes and inquired if it was true, as she heard from his father that he had been quite contemplative, and if he found himself curious about the world beyond their borders. Hearing this question, Dane's expression shifted, and he lowered his gaze slightly before admitting that yes, his father had said staying there would be a waste of his talents, and after thinking it over he found himself curious about what was out there. He added, his voice tinged with guilt, as if his decision was a betrayal, that he was sorry if he had upset her. Lady Lily's heart softened at her son's pained expression. She sat down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his head to soothe him, and whispered that there was no need to apologize. She continued, her voice trailing off slightly, that his sisters had already left, and if he left too, but then she composed herself with a tender smile, saying it was all right, she understood. She acknowledged how great his talents were, and that even if he wished to stay by her side, the world would still call to him. She admitted it would be wonderful if she could keep him close a little longer, but life rarely granted such luxuries, so he should go pursue his desires and follow the path his heart led him to. Strengthened by his mother's words, Dane felt his resolve grow firm. He straightened up and declared with determination that even if he left home he would return often and share his stories with her, promising to tell her everything he saw out there. Lady Lily responded, her eyes glimmering with both pride and a touch of sadness, that it seemed she would need to prepare to send him into the world just like his father. Dane, curiosity lighting up his face, asked what she meant by that. She mused with a wry smile that she had planned to teach him basic observation and reconnaissance at a more leisurely pace, but now it looked like he would need to learn how to set traps and avoid them too. She chuckled softly, her words carrying a sense of anticipation as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Only then did Dane feel the quiet days of his life slowly slipping away. He thought in exasperation if he was going to have to take more of his mother's special lessons and skills even to dispose of bodies. Lily then added with a casual smile that he would also need to learn human anatomy as well. Dane sighed inwardly, his future already feeling overwhelming, and thought he might collapse from exhaustion before even stepping outside. He replied confidently that yes, dear mother would teach him many things. Lady Lily concluded cheerfully, and Dane affirmed that he would do his very best, his mind racing with the thought that special lessons from parents who teach with love were exactly what he needed to be thoroughly prepared to step out into the world. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.